Today we're looking at the newly updated Filmic Pro camera app, specifically for the video side where you can now shoot high bitrate and log and flat color profiles. This update took me a little bit by surprise. I thought we might see high bit rates, but I was surprised to see the log and flat color profiles. And while there are several new things added, these are the ones that stand out for me. Shooting high bit rate really helps the quality of your footage. And then ever since Filmic Pro added log and flat to their app, it's just really the best way to get cinematic looking footage with your smartphone. So let's check out the new color profiles. I shot some test footage using Windows high contrast scenes around my house this weekend when I got the update. I auto-exposed the camera and then I switched between each setting. So these aren't beauty shots. I did these just to test to see how the log, flat, and their default, their standard mode compare, how they stack up. Pay attention to the wall on this, the right and the upper left. We'll come back to this later. Shooting outside windows is one of the harder things for any camera, let alone a smartphone, and so these are pretty extreme examples, and I wouldn't normally even shoot this kind of stuff probably in a real world scenario, but that's what tests are for. Looking out the window, you can see there's not a lot of dynamic range. And here with this fence, the same thing. I included the sky in the shot looking at the dynamic range, or lack thereof. You may be seeing a pattern here that there's really no difference in the dynamic range and the highlights in particular throughout all this footage. Really, after shooting this, what I've determined is this isn't necessarily true log footage. I think it's more of a global contrast lift. But really it's not affecting the dynamic range like traditional log would. And so in saying that, let's look at it compared to other apps. And the first one here is the Filmic Log versus Filmic Pro. Now look at the right and the top left. The Filmic Log doesn't hold the highlights at all. And Filmic Pro, it was a tough scene, and it was also a high ISO scene, but you can still see the blinds better with Filmic Pro. The top left of the screen in each shot, on Filmic Pro, you can see the blinds, and on Moment, you cannot see them really at all. Now back to this room, and again, this is a really hard shot for any type of camera. Pay attention to the window. Now when we get to Filmic Pro, while it's still blown out there, you can start to see stuff. And I also added in the native iPhone camera just to see the dynamic range there. It's Rec 709, not log. And now you're really starting to see where Filmic Pro and of course the native camera are showing more dynamic range. Why, I'm not 100% sure. I am not a video engineer. I've worked with log footage pretty much from every manufacturer, and so I have a good idea how log works. But in this world, we're getting into computational stuff, and so it is different than traditional cameras. But again, here you can see sky with Filmic Pro and with the native iPhone, and you cannot with the Moment app. And all these shots were exposed the exact same way. So correcting the log, let's take a look at that. And the log corrects pretty nicely. Just knowing that you can't pull the highlights back, it actually looks pretty good. And it being lower contrast, it definitely has a more cinematic look. And so while you're not getting more dynamic range, you are getting a more interesting looking, more cinematic looking footage. So I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with this app. I do like how it records the movies right to your phone. That way you don't have to go to a separate library. But in the same breath, it also clutters up your phone and takes up a lot of your iCloud storage. So it's nice to swipe through them and easily look at your footage, but it might be nice to have an option where it didn't do that and it's saved to a separate library. I like that they added a RGB histogram and a waveform. Nice for keeping that exposure in the right range. One nice thing is you can shoot 4K 60 with log or flat. You cannot do that on Filmic Pro. Now I have a sneaking suspicion that's because this is not true log, so it's not taking up as much processing power and creating heat. But regardless, it's still nice that you can do that. One quirky thing, even though I had the camera set up to record in H.264, it didn't. All my files were H.265 or HEVC, and I thought maybe it was because it was high frame rate or that it was high bit rate, but I tested it and every setting I did, it still recorded in H.265. I assume this is a bug, possibly operator error, but I tested it and couldn't get it to work. And so getting your files off the phone ends up being tricky. Now if you're editing in LumaFusion or something on your phone, it's not a big deal. But if you're editing on a computer, it causes a little bit of a headache. When you try to use AirDrop, it will convert them to H.264, and so it lowers the quality and it takes forever. So don't do that. So then I went to use file sharing in iTunes. I do this with large Filmic Pro files, or if I shoot high frame rate 4K. But when I got into file sharing, while I found LumaFusion and Filmic Pro, I didn't see the Moment app. So I can only assume that it doesn't work, or again, maybe I'm missing something, but I couldn't find it. So I ended up using Dropbox, and I also used iCloud. This worked fine, it was just a little bit slow. One other nitpicky thing is the white balance. While you can manually set the white balance, there are no presets. Again, at least not that I could find. It's nice to just have a tungsten or a daylight preset where you can just hit one button and you're good to go. And one more thing you kind of have to get used to. All the screen info is there, and when you're framing a shot, it makes it a little bit tricky. Now I like where the audio is, that's fine, and I like the histogram, but when you go into the manual controls, it covers a big chunk of the right side of the screen, and I kept finding myself thinking I wasn't framing a shot correctly. Oh, and the other thing is, all the information is set up to read it vertically. So it's really geared more towards the photography setup more than it is for horizontal video or photography work, really. But once you hit record, it goes away, and so it's all good, but it's just something you gotta get used to that's a little bit quirky. Everything I shot in this video was with an iPhone 8 Plus, and the opening segment I used the Moment anamorphic lens. So here is that opening, and I'm going to show the ungraded and the graded back to back, and the graded has stabilization added to it as well. I'm really happy that Moment is focusing on filmmakers as well as photographers. Mobile video has come a long way in the last couple years, and it's only really just getting started with all the new computational ways to make dynamic range so much better, the video better in low light. Who knows what's coming next, but what I will say is I don't think this is a log profile. Flat is one thing. I think this log is more like an effect. Again, I'm not a video engineer, but to my eye, they just did kind of a global contrast adjustment. Now, in saying all that, the footage still looks good. You just don't get the dynamic range you might get with log. You do get a nice softer, and I mean that in a good way, cinematic image. So I would definitely use it. One really cool thing is all the color grading I did in this, I used the Filmic Pro LUTs that I created, and the Filmic Pro LUTs seem to work fine with this footage. I really love seeing companies like Moment, Filmic Pro, and Moondog Labs, and Helium, and B-Script, all these companies that are working independently to make mobile filmmaking better for all of us. Please like, subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.